Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I have a guest this time around. I have an author with me. This is Bruce Clark, and he is the author of Athens, City of Wisdom. With this lovely cover, this lovely hefty edition from Pegasus Books here in the U.S. And it's all about the history of the city of Athens. So, hello, greetings, welcome. Care to tell my viewers a little bit about yourself, about your history?
Yes, I mean, I'm a professional journalist. I'm an international news reporter. I've worked for Reuters news agency. I've worked for the Financial Times in Washington, D.C. for a while. I worked for the Times of London in Moscow. For the last 20 years or so, I've worked either full-time or part-time for The Economist weekly. And I still contribute to The Economist. So basically, I'm a journalist who likes to dabble in history.
And won a fairly prestigious historical award. Yes, the Runciman Award.
Indeed. Well, thank you. Yes, I mean, yes, I did. I have written another book about Greek history, and that was about the huge population exchange between Greece and Turkey in the 1920s, and I did win an award for that. So,
which isn't given to dabblers, I might add.
Well, yes,
we'll leave your self-deprecation in place, but they don't give that to dabblers.
That's kind of good to say.
But I have to wonder, then, given that background and given your previous book, I have to wonder what would lead you to a sweeping panoramic history of it seems, if you see what I mean, it seems like it wouldn't be your next book. It seems, has this been a long simmering passion project?
Well, look, it's something that has never been tried. I mean, I'm not aware of any similar book. And I mean, most books about Athens skip, in a single leap from the ancient period, which is very well covered, to the modern period, which begins about 1820, 1830, and they just ignore everything in the middle.
Right.
And so I took on the challenge of trying to work out what did happen in the middle. And indeed, there were some very, very quiet periods in Athens history when it wasn't much more than a village. But what I found out was that the Acropolis never ceased to be an important place, an important stronghold, an important holy place. So whether there is continuity in the history of Athens, you can debate, but there is certainly continuity in the history of the Acropolis. It's always been important.
Do you remember the first time you saw the Acropolis?
Well, yes, good question. Yes, I mean, I was lucky enough to be taken twice on family holidays to Greece as a child, which was kind of, I grew up in Northern Ireland where I live now, and it was an unusual choice in the early 70s. But one summer, in summer 1970 to be exact, my father simply drove the whole family from Ireland to Greece, a ferry from Ireland to France, another ferry from Italy to Greece. And we spent about 2 weeks driving around Greece. And we saw the Acropolis, the Parthenon. In those days, you could wander freely inside the Parthenon, which you can't do now. So that was a wonderful experience. And then 2 years later, he chartered an rickety old wooden sailing boat and took us around the Cyclades for 10 days or so. So we had two unforgettable family holidays as a child in Greece, and that really sowed the seeds.
I should mention as a note for you viewers that our guest here is not the first really good author in the family. The aforementioned sailor father also has books to his credit that are really good. really good. Sailing Around Russia is a classic.
Well, yes. Well, thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying yes. I mean, that was a really collaborative family project. And
also the final book. You had a hand in the final book, right?
Yes, you're right. Yes, The Call of the Running Tide. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes,
absolutely beautiful book. Just a beautiful book.
Thank you for saying that.
Those two at least belong on the Armchair Mariner reader's shelf. So there must be something in the genes here. But when you saw the Acropolis as a child.
Yes.
So your first views of it were before you knew what it was, before you were aware of its significance.
Yes, I mean, I was already studying ancient Greek in school, when I saw it. But to be honest, I suppose I came back at the age of 17. I was a school leaver. I was filling in time before university. And I spent actually 5 months in Athens at that formative stage. And I remember climbing the Acropolis, seeing the Parthenon, and suddenly realizing it's not only very historic, it's not only of great archaeological interest, it is actually also very, very beautiful. And that it took a 17-year-old mind to take that in. At 11 or 13, I couldn't really take in the beauty.
But by 17, in Athens as a 17-year-old. Boy, oh boy,
Indeed. Yes, yes.
that is the
Indeed.
perfect reintroduction to the city.
Indeed. Yes.
And that
Yes.
that realization that, you know, so many people have commented that I wasn't expecting it to be a living site. I was
Yes.
expecting
Yes.
it to be a kind of museum site. I've heard that from so many people who most certainly do not report that about the Great Pyramids at Giza.
Yes,
You
indeed.
go there
Yes,
and
yes.
you are walking around in what is obviously the crumbling remains of something that might once have been beautiful, but is not beautiful anymore.
And yes, whereas the Parthenon retains its beauty very much, doesn't it? Yes.
But I have to ask, so when you took on this project, you mentioned that most histories of Athens leap from, you know, the 4th century BC to Byron. So everything in
right.
between.
Exactly.
I'm curious to know, writers talk about projects with their friends.
Yeah. Indeed.
You must have drawn your share of blank looks, right? From people who just, most people that I know, well, speaking of America where there is no education, but I would imagine everywhere else,
right.
most people think that Athens as a city died right alongside Socrates when he drank the hemlock. Both died at the same time, and that's not true.
No, well, at a number of levels, it's not true. I mean, Athens was remarkably robust until about the year 500 AD of the Common Era, in the sense that throughout the Roman period and the late Roman period, it remained an extremely important center of education and philosophy. And indeed, you know, when the Eastern Roman Empire was Christian, I mean, Athens remained stubbornly pagan and, no matter, you know, sort of Neoplatonist. And so the Platonist philosophy school was really only closed sometime in the 500s. We're not sure exactly when. And then, you know, there was a very sleepy period indeed for the next 500 years or so. Not because Platonist philosophy completely died, but it was sort of transferred to Constantinople. And really, Constantinople took over as, you know, the metropolis of the Greek world. And there were one or two empresses of Byzantium who came from Athens, but they didn't do much in Athens. They just sort of moved to the big city, and that's where they held their power.
Yes, you have that. You have Athens as that key, sort of the Oxford of its day, right, where the wealthy people sent their kids to be schooled.
Exactly. And not and to be schooled, but also to engage in kind of wild frat boy antics as well. I mean, we have extraordinary. And in the mid 300s AD, I mean, you have two of the fathers of the Christian church, and then one of the sort of anti-Christian emperors, Julian. They were all sort of classmates almost. So they coincided in Athens, and of course that was the topic for a great novel by Gore Vidal. And you know, and the Athens that they knew and loved in their different ways was a very rowdy place where, you know, students would haze each other, and there was, you know, massive, sometimes violent competition between different schools and different professors. I mean, it was full of learning, but also full of rowdiness.
You seem to me in the book to be affectionate but stern with the ghost of Gore Vidal.
Indeed, yes,
you don't let him get away with anything, but you don't dislike him. At least that's the impression that I got.
Look, I mean, it's a very, very skilled and attractive and readable book that he wrote about Emperor Julian.
Yes, it's called Julian, for those of you who are. It's a big book called Julian. I think the most readable thing that he ever did.
Indeed, yes. Now, I mean, in a way, I mean, he is writing for all those people who, whatever they think about the Christian faith, nonetheless have a kind of resentment of the fact that the Christian faith has been hegemonic, sort of roughly since that time, and so, you know, it's something that people had to learn whether they liked it or not. So you can even you can be a Christian and you can have a sneaking sympathy with the view of Gore Vidal that really this was the beginning of a kind of an unhealthy Christian hegemony, that actually, you know, it gave Christianity a power which it didn't always use in a very benign way.
So when you must have, looking at the broad scope of Athenian history, you must have known ahead of time, before you started your research, that there were those long fallow periods where there wasn't much going on besides village politics. Did you telescope your research and your roughing out and the note taking and the writing accordingly, or did you go into those fallow periods maybe wondering if they weren't quite so fallow? If you see what I mean.
No, totally. But say 500 to 1,000 really is quite fallow. There honestly isn't too much to be said. apart from the empresses that came from there, and but then from 1000 onwards, that's when it starts to get quite interesting. And there are, first of all, from 1000 onwards, it starts to be a moderately important Byzantine town and pilgrimage center. And the Parthenon becomes an important center of the veneration of the Virgin Mary. So where people used to come to the Virgin Athena, they now come to venerate the Virgin Mary. And they write of an extraordinary, mysterious light that emanates from the Parthenon that somehow symbolizes or signals the presence of the Virgin. And in the final years of the Byzantine period, that's sort of the very late 1100s, around 1200, you have a remarkable Archbishop of Athens, who was, in Byzantine terms, a very well-educated man, and somebody who had hoped for a better posting than Athens, frankly. I mean, it's obvious that when he's posted to Athens, he thinks he's being sent to the boondocks. But nonetheless, he becomes fond of the place, and he becomes, he's a well-educated classicist, and so he knows all about ancient Greek letters. But nonetheless, he regards the Christian faith as greatly superior to the 12 gods of Mount Olympus. So he's wrestling, in his own mind with, how can it be that there was this great civilization, but then their religion wasn't nearly as good as ours, and that we've forsaken the false virgin who is Athena for the true virgin who is Mary, and he's a very human figure. And in his sermons and his writings, you can actually see him wrestling with this dilemma: sort of ancient Greece good, ancient Greek religion bad, Christianity good, and he's kind of
the quintessential dilemma of the humanists. They all love the classical literature, but they knew they worshiped the wrong gods. So how far do you go here?
That's it. Exactly. Yeah.
That I have a copy of Julian.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
I didn't realize that when we were talking about it, but it's sitting over my shoulder.
Indeed. Yeah.
But you, in the course of this book, you encounter a number of figures like that.
Yes.
Sort of stand out odd biographies that the general reader will not know about. That really stand out. They walk through these pages. Was it a joy to find those people and to research them?
Yes, it was. I mean, listen. I for the Frankish period, so-called. I mean, that was when Athens was ruled by various West European dynasties. I engaged with a handful of scholars that specialize in that period. And I hope I give them sufficient credit, So I mean, it's really a very recondite field, Frankish Athens. But nonetheless, I kind of traded information a bit with those small number of people who specialize. And then Ottoman Athens, again, a relatively recondite field, especially the early part. And once again, I mean, some scholar friends, they became friends, were very generous to me, and I try and sort of fully acknowledge that in the book. And to take one example, I mean, the person who is known piously as Saint Philothea, who is a woman who, and then a nun, who was a very prominent figure in Athens in the 1st century of Ottoman rule. I mean, during which time, the sort of the local economy of Athens ticked upwards. I mean, it was in some ways, it was quite a good time economically for the modest town of Athens, but it was, but there were losers, and this rather wonderful woman, Saint Philothea Benizelu, and Revula Benizelu was her worldly name. She ran a nunnery, which is also kind of a shelter for women on the run, and even women who'd converted, who'd been enslaved, or women who had been sort of forcibly made to embrace Islam, and she took them in. And she helped them to escape from Athens if necessary, or gave them sort of a new, a new life. And she made herself unpopular, not only with the Ottoman authorities, but it appears with the Greek Christian menfolk as well, because she has harsh things to say, about the local Ottoman officialdom, but she also has remarkably harsh things to say about, the Athenians of her own day. And you feel it's the men she's attacking for being, as it were, too compliant with Ottoman authority, and a system that is sort of, a system that probably, allows you to do quite well if you're, say, a Greek Christian merchant, but nonetheless, is hard on some people, especially women, especially dissident women. So anyway, Saint Philothea is not just a pious figure of the imagination. She's a very, very concrete and human individual who was, who was killed. I mean, she was a martyr, as she was. Unknown people came and attacked her convent and beat her up, and she died of her wounds and everything. So she's she gave her life for what she believed in, And of the various saints in the calendar, she is one of the more real ones, one would say.
And when you mentioned the everyday people of her day, that automatically makes me think of the latter parts of this book, that start to dovetail with your own personal experience with Athens.
Indeed.
You start to enter the story, at least peripherally, as someone who's not just unearthing things from history, but has seen these things. So that automatically makes me wonder what you think of the present state of things in Athens. Leaving aside the educational bit, I think that 99% of what's in this book, an Athenian young man that you stopped on the street would not know.
Well, yes.
They just happen to live in a cynosure of history. That doesn't mean they know the history. American tourists are always flabbergasted by that. They'll stop a stranger in the cab or in the restaurant. They'll look at the Acropolis and say, "So tell me the history." They don't know. Where do you assess the city today? It's very much a living place.
Well, it's very much a living place, and it's become highly multicultural in interesting ways. I would say that ecologically it's quite fragile. I mean, in the age of climate change, this could be a very thirsty city. Garbage disposal is a serious problem. You have an enormous sort of suppurating, poisonous sort of garbage dump on the west of the city, which is supposed to be recycling rubbish, but doesn't really recycle very much, and that is poisoning all the neighborhoods in its immediate vicinity. And so no
one's addressing that problem. Right. That problem.
I guess as always, there's kind of regional inequality, so that if a lot of rich people live in the north of Athens, the northeast, or on the coast to the south of Athens, so they're not directly affected by what's going on in the west. And so there is great. I mean, even more than when I first knew Athens, there is tremendous sort of local inequality, I would say. So that's one of the challenges. And generally,
climate, certainly. You mentioned climate.
Yes,
it's a roastingly hot place, and there's no water.
That's right. Yes, exactly. I mean, there are 3 beautiful rivers running through Athens, and there are lovely descriptions of them in ancient literature, but they have virtually all been covered over. And the place is, it feels very thirsty and a great lack of greenness. And one of the best things that any visionary leader of Greece could do would be to restore the flow of the rivers through Athens, and that is happening on a small scale. The more kind of greenness and water the center of Athens could get, the better. But that's we're a long way from that now, unfortunately.
And the time you've spent in the city in recent years must give you a sense of what ordinary Athenians think about their city, about its future, for instance.
Look, I mean,
is Athens a city that young people want to escape?
Well, to some extent, it depends on sort of how lucky they are and how, what their economic circumstances are. I mean, I did my research mainly in 2018, 2019. I spent sort of a good chunk of both those years in the heart of Athens. And that was a time of recovery from a really terrible economic crash.
The economic crash, yes.
And the place was, there was a real sort of optimistic feeling in the air, at least in all the central parts of Athens. New tourism. So tourism was becoming more diverse, more attractive. Lots of Greeks who'd lived abroad were sort of coming back and starting, experimental fusion cuisine restaurants and sort of boutique hotels, and sort of even new music styles are coming into. Something that sort of took my fancy was that among kind of quite well-off Greek youngsters now have a passion for kind of Greek African rap. There's a sort of fusion rap that mixes, and there's a generation of sort of African rappers who've grown up in Greece, and they rap in Greek, or a mixture of English and Greek. And a lot of the admirers of that music are actually, they're not the poorest Athenian kids. They're actually, among private school pupils, you'll have a sort of a certain, penchant for this Greek African rap style.
Where is the country's nodes of power now? Is Athens one of those nodes of power, or of those moved elsewhere?
Yes. Well, in a sense, and one of Greece's problems is the sort of disproportionate size of Athens. I mean, it is the greater urban area of Athens is 4 million people. and Greece in total is about 11 million people.
Right, right.
So it is nearly half the country, and there is no city that even approximates to Athens,
Right.
to greater Athens in size.
A historian told me years ago, the last thing you want is to live in a country with only one city.
Well,
the shorthand might be that is true for Greece, and that is not healthy.
Yes, and yes, you're right. I mean, look, I mean, there are, significant, provincial centres which have sort of, great charm and great historic interest, and some, and well, Thessaloniki has always been the co-capital. In centuries ago, it was the co-capital with Byzantium. Now it's the co-capital with Athens. But and I suppose, yes, I mean, one side effect of the crisis when it was at its worst is that sort of a decent sprinkling of sort of talented Athenian youngsters, instead of going abroad, they went back to their home villages and they did things like start organic farms and, grow herbs, or you say herbs, and we say herbs, or mushrooms, or even sort of very pure olive oil, and they kind of and they built up businesses based on the kind of the purity of the Greek countryside. So there was a certain return to the rural roots, which was one of the responses to the crisis, and that was actually quite a healthy phenomenon in some ways.
And that was fueled or enabled by the internet?
I suppose, yes, indeed. Yes, absolutely.
The brand of the authentic Greek countryside, that is a very potent brand. You can sell that anywhere. But you can't sell it probably at your local market. You would need the internet to do it.
Yes, and it meant that those youngsters, in a sense, as they weren't giving up all that much, by moving to their home villages. They would still had access to the same communications as they would have had in Athens. So it was an attractive choice in some ways. What
about politically? What do you think the future of the city is politically?
Yeah, well, now the city, yes. I suppose that's almost inseparable from what the future of Greece is politically,
yes.
Isn't it? I suppose, well, one of the questions is, how healthy is democracy in the land of its birth?
How healthy is democracy in the land of its birth? I couldn't have put that any better. You should try writing. You're quite good with this English language.
Look, I mean, there were, at the height of the crisis, I mean, there were moments when democracy was looking quite wobbly, in the sense that you had a government which was rhetorically sort of on the fairly far left. You had movements on the street which were sort of on the violent extreme right. You had many citizens saying, what's the point of voting? Because after all, it's only our foreign creditors who decide what happens here. So, there's no point in voting. So really, there was a kind of bitterness in the atmosphere that really, gave one reason to think that democracy might not be in such a healthy state. But in a way, there's been a pleasant surprise in that there was a fairly sort of civilized and peaceful transfer of power from the left to the center right. I mean, whether with no no questioning of the legitimacy of the vote, particularly.
Sounds wonderful.
And also, well, look, in a sense, there are worse. There are worse.
There are examples that come to mind of worse transfers of power. Yes, indeed.
But, I mean, one perhaps reason for this calmness is that the leaders of the sort of violent ultra-right party were put in prison. And they were put in prison because they were found guilty of kind of running a criminal gang, because at least one killing was sort of ascribed to their machinations, and and they sort of ceased to be a political force as a result of that. Now, and indeed, there ceased to be that particular corner of politics seemed to kind of quieten down when the leaders were put in prison. But I suppose I would worry, has the phenomenon died completely, or are there circumstances where the violent extreme right could raise its head? It did once. Right. Could it do so again? So that would be one of the worries.
But you always have to worry. Is it whether the heads of the Hydra? You always have to worry if you chop off one, what is lurking around the corner?
Yes, indeed.
But I want to finish up with a little bit of technicalities, just because I'm curious. I think maybe my viewers might be curious. A book like this is going to do very well in America. American book clubs are going to snap this up. America is full of passionate amateur readers of history.
Thank you.
I'm curious to know, do you know how a book like this will do in Athens? Well, I'm assuming that the Greek translation rights were the first ones you sold.
They have been sold, and the translation is sort of at an early stage. It's in progress, and I think it will do well because Greeks are interested in sort of what foreigners think of them. It'll be that it is in English. It's unfortunately quite difficult to get at the moment because why? Because of Brexit. Because Brexit has made extremely high customs duties between, and so for a small bookshop, there are many excellent bookshops in Athens which sell a range of foreign language publications, but those small bookshops are saying that it's actually, the customs duties are so high that it's almost prohibitive for them to import the book. So my friends in Athens have to buy it on Kindle sometimes.
Well, at least that option exists. That's good.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, something that you just said. One last point. I promise I won't keep you. I won't keep you all day. But you just said that Greek readers tend to be very interested in how foreigners view the history of their country. And I'm wondering, it's the age-old joke where a person takes endless French lessons and then they go to France to exercise their newfound language skills. And are only then told that they're speaking French with a Brooklyn accent. They don't realize it until. And I'm wondering, I mean, writing this book, it didn't seem to me like you were at least intentionally trying to write from a foreigner's viewpoint. Are you suspecting? I mean, are you aware of some of those differences, or will they just be smuggled in because you can't avoid them?
Well, I mean, I suppose I'm an intermediate state in the sense that I do have a lot of friends in Greece, and I'm very comfortable in Athens. I can kind of blend into the crowd quite easily. My Greek is fluent, and so I can do the Greek thing if you like. But nonetheless, I was writing for initially a British publisher and I was actually physically in the United Kingdom when I was writing the final 2/3 of the book. And I don't hide the fact that I've written for the British press. It is, in a sense, it is a perspective of somebody who loves Greece, but is nonetheless, a very affectionate outsider, shall we say.
I wonder what the reviews will be. The Greek reviews.
Well, I wonder as well. Look, I mean, the final chapters are sort of, they are almost, I would almost describe them as gossip, or sort of their diary and gossip, about, based on, very, human and sort of physical experience of being in Athens.
They're tremendously evocative. Tremendous.
Well, thank you. Yes,
you shift the narrative tone in those final bits away. It's clear that you didn't want to use that tone in the historical parts.
Yes.
Consciously avoid it, and then it just sort of filters in, and it's wonderful. It feels like like a final an affectionate farewell from an author you've spent all these pages with. It works really well.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Thank you. Yes.
But I'm still curious to know what the Greek reviews will say. I wonder if you'll be surprised. Will any of them say only a foreigner would say this? Will there be
and many, and I've no doubt there'll be those who will say only a foreigner would say something so stupid or so biased or so, I'm prepared for that.
About even one part of this book that would prompt a Greek reviewer to say, mind your own business, essentially, and I can't think of one.
Well, I won't tell you. I'm not going to put the ideas in you. But I can think of a few anyway.
Well, thank you very much for your time. This was
great. It was I enjoyed it.
I will make sure to send you a link, and I will include all of the information for the book. For the UK cover, the UK cover is bloody red. And this one is,
the American cover is very good.
I'll leave all the information down below.
Thank you.
Viewers want to check out the book.
Absolutely. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, we'll just stop right here and let you get back to work.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.